we talk about how you can avoid this big tax on your inherited IRA. Let's start with kind of the basics of how to think about transferring wealth wisely, whether it's your person passing it on or inheriting it. What are some of those kind of things to think about? And maybe kind of, George, I want to talk about how you think about it and kind of how you work with your clients or what you've seen has gone wrong.
This topic here, how to transfer wealth wisely, applies regardless of if you're talking about an IRA or you're talking about a trust account. It doesn't even have to pertain just to financial accounts. It could pertain to property and, items. So, three key considerations is who is going to be the beneficiary. Consider the potential for some spending guardrails, and we'll talk about some of the benefits of those, and how to think about and minimize taxes on these inheritances. So the first question, in some cases, it's a very obvious answer, but I think we may be oversimplifying it in many ways. When you think about who is going to benefit and how much will they receive, typically you're talking about individuals like your surviving spouse, children, grandchildren, other family members, could be a friend. You want to consider that individual or the multiple individuals. You want to consider what is their financial stability, life stage, where they are in their earnings cycle. What are some potential vulnerabilities? Unfortunately, we do need to consider things like substance abuse and debt. If they're in a profession that has a potential for high lawsuits, think attorneys, who are they going to go after? Yeah. Doctors, business owners, folks that have the potential to be sued. When they go after assets, it could include the inheritance they receive from you. The other important consideration when you're considering who and how much to give, more specifically the who, think about this. Money amplifies existing traits. It's almost like turning the volume up on things that are already there. So if somebody is already generous, if somebody is already making wise financial decisions, typically when you turn up the amount of money they have, that will amplify those traits. And on the contrary, if you're seeing problematic situations, poor money decisions, bad habits, and you turn up the amount of money that they have, that tends to intensify those as well. So those are very practical, real life considerations. Now, what about charities? Think about charities that align with your values. When you look out into the world and you see things that are broken, what breaks your heart the most? It could be a variety of things. Poverty. It's very important to make sure the charity is credible, they're financially transparent, and the impact they're having. And I'll mention, typically you are naming a charity, but you have the ability to do something interesting. Instead of naming specific charities in your charitable remainder trust, name your donor advised fund. You may already be using a donor advised fund. You may already include your children, grandchildren, or other family members in the decisions around what charities to benefit. You can actually continue that and fund that at the end of their, the beneficiary's life, continuing a family legacy of giving. That's a tremendous opportunity. You can use private foundations and donor advised funds as beneficiaries to a charitable remainder trust. When considering how much, I do want to mention that most people, let's say I had 2 children, I'll give them 50% each. I'd like you to consider an alternative. We love our children equally, and if we love them equally, we need to treat them uniquely. If one child goes into the arts and is the typical starving artist, and the other is a surgeon, are their needs equal? And would we be treating them fairly if we left the same amount to both? So that's just a consideration. When we talk about spending guardrails, I like to ask the question, let's say we have $1 million left over in an IRA after the surviving spouse passes away. Would access to $1 million on day one be more of a blessing or a curse to that future generation? We've heard the stories about lottery winnings and professional athletes who make a lot of money in a short time period. Oftentimes it gets squandered. Are they any better off for it at the end? There are ways to structure your giving, and a charitable remainder trust is one example, to provide an income stream. So instead of $1 million day one, you might be getting $100,000 in year one, $105,000 in
Yeah.
year two. And it could be a growing income stream over the course of their life. And some of the benefits there, you're encouraging healthy money habits. Somebody who may not be used to managing wealth now has the opportunity to, almost like working out, you build up those muscles. You don't ask them to lift the 200-pound weight right away.
Yeah.
You're preventing the rapid depletion and wise money management techniques. And lastly, I want to talk about minimizing taxes. We've already talked about that so many times, but using that example of $1 million, and let's say there was no growth, and let's say that was distributed over 10 years, that's another $100,000 of taxable income that goes to your future heirs and adds on top of their taxable income. That could bump them up. There are ways to structure this where you use the guardrails, provide a smaller amount of money on an annual basis, and still provides for all of their needs, but you're significantly minimizing taxes. Another consideration is your estate may be able to receive a charitable deduction for the contribution to a charitable remainder trust. Transferring wealth wisely really requires careful consideration. It requires some time and energy, some thoughtfulness, addressing both the benefits, but then also the potential downsides of passing on wealth. And implementing spending guardrails is oftentimes a very wise way to structure passing on wealth. At the same time, you could be minimizing the taxes and ultimately leaving more money to your loved ones and the charities you care most about.
Yeah, it can truly create a win-win-win. And one of the scenarios where you see people squander wealth the most is without spending guardrails. You put a kid in a candy store, and if they don't have self-control, they're going to eat it all. Those are some of the most common scenarios where people lose inheritances or wealth, which is why one of the most common ways for, whether it's with a charitable remainder trust or other trusts, there's typically limitations on how much future generations could pull out per year, because the idea is you don't want one bad decision or poor beneficiary to impact future generations or their long life just because they have a bad period in their life. You don't want that to impact their future and squander that. One other piece that's to call out here is kind of mention two benefits. In a lot of cases, for typical transferring wealth wisely, you actually don't want to transfer it directly to an individual, because George mentioned this. Maybe they're in a litigious profession, or maybe they just get in a car accident and get sued. A lot of times when you transfer wealth, when it's meaningful amounts, you will transfer it to a trust for that individual. So in the situation that person gets sued, whether it's their job, it's a car accident, those assets are protected. So again, it's preserving the randomness or life or their job or whatever existential risk, plus potentially the individuals, if they don't have that muscle to control how they spend it, is putting it in these ways that are, taking a little bit step back and more protective in multiple aspects.
Yeah. Some examples that we often see is, let's say you're passing on money to a child who has special needs. That could compromise some of the benefits that they're eligible to receive. This is another way to be intentional about how you transfer money to them. Or in the unfortunate case of a spouse, your kids are married at the time, everybody's happy, and then down the road they decide to divorce. If not managed appropriately, half of that money could go to the divorcing spouse.